Hey, this is Phil, aka Corinne.
And I'm Alex Berg, and you're listening to the I'm from Driftwood podcast.
If you just can't get enough of I'm from Driftwood, go check out its YouTube channel. The stories have tens of millions of views and over 100,000 subscribers. And a new story is uploaded every week. You can also browse every story it's ever published since it launched in 2009. Speaking of stories, let's get to today's episode.
So today we're talking about allies. And the first story we're going to hear about is a woman named Rosa.
When people ask me what I am, if I'm LGBTQA, what am I? I tell people I'm neither. I don't identify by my sexuality. I'm a mother and a grandmother. I was raised Catholic. I'm still very much Catholic. And I went to Catholic school. And I was going to be a nun, but that went by the wayside when I met Enrique. And so with Enrique, he was like my first everything, first kiss, first date, everything. Fell in love with him. We got married. And we ended up having children. But honestly, there was no marriage there. And Enrique was gay. And he never came out of the closet. But the signs were all there. Being a good Mexican wife, I refused to see those signs. I just figured I could carry the family by doing what I had been taught to do. One morning he came home and he told me, I can't do this anymore. And he abandoned the family. And I found things like pictures and love letters and the like. And at that point, for me, the face of gay was Enrique. And I really hated him. And it followed that I hated anyone who was gay, his lovers and anybody else. And I honestly agreed that anyone who was gay should go to hell. I was upset because my heart had been broken. I was abandoned with 2 little daughters, 2 infants. I had debt just all the way through the roof. And it was really a difficult time for me, but having my background, my upraising, being raised Catholic and being devout, I realized that I couldn't let a lie be the basis of my life, including the lie that he was all bad. It was through a lot of prayer and retreats and talking to people that I trusted as spiritual advisors. And what I understood after a while was that Enrique was not a demon or an angel. He wasn't a saint. He was not a sinner. He was just a plain old human being. And so that was really, really, really important because I knew that for the rest of my life, I was going to be looking at the faces of those 2 little girls and I was going to see Enrique. And so as a Latina especially, familia is very important to us. And no one can tell us that there is ever any reason to not love our children. When my youngest daughter, Cecilia, was in high school, she came out to me. And what happened was that, my daughter, Cecilia, is like a really emotional person. If she's happy, the whole world is happy. Everybody is singing. It looks like a scene from Enchanted. She's cooking. Everything's great. But if she is not happy, we all know, the dogs hide, the clouds cover the sky, and we're just careful around her. So she came home one day when she was in high school and she was just quiet, just didn't say anything. And I thought that was kind of strange. And she came up to me and she said, Mom, I've got something to tell you, but don't get mad. I thought she was pregnant. She started crying. And she was just falling apart in front of me. And I got scared. I thought, what if she's hooked on drugs? What if she burned a drug dealer? All kinds of crazy nonsense. And she was having a hard time talking and getting the words out. And she told me, Mom, don't hate me. I date girls. I like girls. Don't hate me. And that was pretty hard because, for me, I would do anything for my kids. I think to myself, I would even die for my kids. And there would be no way I could hate them. I don't understand this whole thing of a parent hating their kids. I don't get it. But she was in front of me, believing with all her heart that I was going to hate her. We talked. I told her, Mija, I love you now the way I loved you before you told me, and the way I'll love you until I die. You're my jewel. You're my gift from God. What concerned me was that growing up, because she had been abandoned, she resented her father intensely. And it hurt me to see that it must have been so hard for her to struggle with knowing that she's lesbian and somehow connecting that some part of her father was inside of her. Although I don't think because he was gay and she's lesbian that meant that part of him was inside of her. I mean, it's like, it's just who she is. But I could feel that that's what she associated. And so it must have just been a struggle. It must have been painful for her to have admitted to herself that she is lesbian. I counseled her on, love and commitment and trust and having self-respect for herself. I mean, all of these things that you're supposed to tell your children. And I think I did okay, except for one thing that I told her, and that was careful who you tell. And I feel badly having told her, careful who you tell. I told her out of fear, but there's something wrong with that, something very wrong. If she had been straight, would never have told my daughter, careful who you tell. And it's got to change. We can't be worried that our kids are going to be harmed because of who they love.
The idea of forgiveness for some people when they have been wrong so badly, like she was definitely wronged, right? You could see why she had that hatred, why she held on to it. She didn't let that hatred consume her because she knew that it was a direct line to what her relationship with her kids was going to be like. And she loved her kids so much that she knew, I can let this go. I can let this go. That is, to me, I think that is the ultimate, love of a mother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Come on, that is amazing.
Yeah. And also, there are just so many layers of this story to unpack. There is, you said journey, quite a journey on so many levels. And it's you can have that empathy for her that at the time, it felt to her like what Enrique was doing was deeply selfish, to abandon your family and your young children and to leave them in this really precarious financial state. Completely understandable why she was having all of these feelings. I was thinking about how tough it must have been just to be in that situation, at that time, at a time when obviously Enrique couldn't just be out about who he was either. And the kind of choice, the kind of calculus a person has to make to abandon their family. Yeah. It's so much. And then for her, it became his sexual orientation becomes very intertwined with the abandonment for her. Right. So she really, him identifying as gay and then leaving her, it just becomes so enmeshed together that for her, it's impossible to separate these two things. This act that, who knows, for him was maybe an act of self-preservation or survival. For her, it's very selfish and an act that leaves her so desperate. And then her daughter has this complicated relationship potentially with her own sexual orientation because of the stuff that her dad put her through. Yeah. I related to this story on a personal level because we have a member of my family who also came out and had to leave their family, their nuclear family, for a time, at a time that was a time period that was extremely homophobic, that where they lived in Philadelphia was not going to fly at all. And I think that it's interesting to hear this story because I think that my mom's feelings about my coming out became very tied up in a lot of the emotions she felt around this person's own experience. And so that when I came out, I think it was really triggering for my mother because it brought her back to the trauma of that time of abandonment and alienation and isolation and that fear. When that person in our family came out, it was at the time, a life-ruining move because of what was happening culturally. It was still such a deeply homophobic time. And so I think also I can relate when I hear Rosa say, you know, she wanted to almost protect her daughter by telling her not to come out because you're afraid and you can't control what's going to happen. That really hit home for me personally. I know I've been in situations. I remember once I was going to this family dinner and my great aunt Esther was going to be there. She was in her 80s. And I remember my dad told me not to talk about being LGBTQ, that if she asked if I was dating someone, just to lie or say like, no, nobody's special. And at the time I was dating the person who became my wife. So, and it was so devastating to have one of those moments where you're put back into the closet by someone you love. And of course my dad apologized and we had long conversations about why it was like so upsetting. Also, I didn't lie at dinner. I talked to my Aunt Esther about everything. And of course she didn't miss a beat. And was totally fine about it. Right. It's always like, who are you protecting here? You know,
that's right.
The 80-plus-year-old woman was down with everything. She didn't care, you know? So it's just like, it just reminded me of my own experiences that I had, because I understand when parents are like upset that their kid is LGBTQ plus because they want to protect the kid, but like you can't. And who are you protecting them from?
Right. And I think this is where you have to kind of do your work, right? This is just like, I feel like Rosa did her work. Like you have to sit with what it is you're grappling with and then pull it apart, right? Because otherwise, like you said, it all becomes one thing, right? You have to pull it apart and look at it and really understand it. So what you said about your dad, it's like, yeah, it's like, what's really happening here? Like who are you trying to protect, right? And honestly, I think you should give some people more credit than you're giving them sometimes, right? Like sometimes people will surprise you and they like you're
yeah, Aunt Esther,
like,
go Aunt Esther, great
like
Aunt
killed
Esther.
it.
Yeah,
and I was like, sure, that's fine. Like, you know, like she's fine. You know, it's like what was that about, really? You know, so you know, it's always like, is this me or am I really trying to protect someone from something? You know, is this really what I'm really trying to do? And I think that's when you really have to sit with something and really pull it apart and be like, okay, where's my part in this? And how am I really feeling about this? And let me not tell a story about somebody that I actually don't have. Right. Like I'm making up a story here.
Right. Yeah. You could hear when Rosa was also talking about hearing how when her daughter came out, this was like also kind of a wake up call for her, but you could really hear the love that she has for her daughter and just how like that love and attachment to her daughter almost seemed to like open her eyes to be more accepting of her daughter. It was really this wake up call where she was like, had to start to parse out, was it, you know, all the feelings about Enrique and how him being gay and him being somebody who abandoned her family, how those were like two different things. That like being gay, like Enrique clearly had some character flaws. Being gay was not one of them. Right. So how she had to learn how to separate that for herself, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to, this makes me transition to the other story because I think there's a common thread here. So the next story is from Jean Claire.
When I was a baby, I had a mommy and a daddy and a Bernie. Bernie met my parents at University of Chicago when they were in graduate school. He was studying history of religion. He was a theologian and he was a passionate Episcopalian who lived with us while he was working on his PhD and his doctoral thesis, which I hear took forever. When I was little, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, I went to people's houses visiting, and I would say, "Where's your Bernie?" Because I thought everybody had a Bernie. And as I got older, and I was in high school and then in college, I got to know my Bernie as a more fully formed person, not just someone who loved me and took care of me, but someone who I in turn cared about and loved. When I finished college and I was living on my own, I ran into Bernie just on an accident in our neighborhood. We lived near each other. And he introduced me to a friend who he said, "Well, this is Joe." And it was at that point I realized that he had relationships that couldn't be talked about or weren't talked about, that weren't acknowledged. And I realized at that moment that he was living his life in the closet, although I probably didn't even have those words. I felt shame at that moment because he was introducing me to someone who was really important to him, but it wasn't introduced in that way. When I was older and I was pregnant with my own child, the really unthinkable thing happened, and that was that Bernie passed away. And it was really sudden, and he was really young. He was 63. He had just retired from an incredible career as a teacher. And I was both grief-stricken, and I was also in the process of helping to plan his memorial. Friends and family came together and asked me to create a memorial booklet that would honor his life, that would be a collection of stories from his friends and family and former students. And I was looking at all of these stories. I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter, and it was the summer time in Chicago, which is very hot and humid. I remember sitting on the floor in my living room with all of these stories all over the floor, in paper, in handwritten scrawls, and in printed out emails. And I sat there and I remember thinking a whole range of emotions, including frustration and shame, because what was apparent to me is that there were huge pieces of his life missing that were not reflected in these stories. There were just the most incredible outpouring of love and memories of a life that was so incredible. And there were no stories about who his loves were. Something just clicked or changed in me that this was not right. I called someone that I knew as a longtime partner of Bernie's, and I asked him to contribute stories to fill in the gaps of Bernie's life. Of course, he was thrilled to be asked to share all of these stories. So I collected stories from him that sort of filled in those holes. And I asked him if he would please come to the memorial, and could I bring him as a guest of honor? So I got in the car with my belly out to here, and I drove to his apartment, and I brought him to the service, and I sat him down with my family and Bernie's extended family in a seat of honor that I felt appropriate and something that Bernie would have really appreciated, but more importantly, honored the people that loved Bernie and Bernie loved. That memorial changed me because I promised to myself that I would connect how I feel and think to what I say and what actions I take. And that shows up as not just going to a pride parade to enjoy the spectacle, but actually walking in the parade with my friends and family and coworkers. It shows up as putting up a pride flag in my office, a very simple thing that sends a very specific message to my coworkers that this is a safe place to be out and to be supported and celebrated for all the ways in which we should as individuals. Those are just some ways in which I try to walk in this world differently since Bernie's passing, and sort of be the person I want to be because of him. I was pregnant when Bernie passed, and my husband and I had a bunch of names, on a list. When Bernie passed, Mark just turned to me and said, "Well, of course her name is Bernadine." That meant a lot to me, and I think she has a great name, and because that name comes with a great legacy of someone who put so much good in this world and passed it on to her.
Going back to what I was saying before we got into the story, I think what I love about this is when you take something like queerness or homosexuality or gayness or whatever it is, and you put a human face on it with a human that you love, you have to look at it a little differently, right? Like I'm sure she knew gay people, she knew queer people, whatever, but she was just like, but Bernie was queer or Bernie was gay and Bernie was my guy. Like, I love this man, So now this is not just an issue that doesn't affect me or doesn't mean anything to me. Now I'm taking it on in this more personal way with being an ally, like making myself a safe space for other queer people or other LGBTQI people. I think that's the underlying thread that I love about allyship. I mean, I think you even saw that in Rosa's story. It's like her daughter, she got okay with it, really, maybe before her daughter, but with her daughter, she really was like, I got to get okay with this. This person that I love, that means the world to me, is telling me that they're lesbian and I need to be okay with that. And I think you see that in Jean Claire's story as well.
Yeah, these were some of my favorite stories I think that we've heard.
Beautiful.
And which surprised me because I think that the term ally has become such a catch-all phrase, and it's become a term that has really lost its meaning in a lot of ways because it's been so, I don't know, it's just become so diluted, I feel like.
I was going to say the exact same thing.
Okay.
It's like lost its power.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what does it even mean anymore?
Yeah.
I feel like people are do a lot of performative gestures and call it allyship, or like corporations are calling themselves allies.
I think we know why.
Right. Yeah. Because now it's just, this catch-all that, I don't know, they touched me because I feel like I'm so jaded when it comes to that term. And it was actually people who, there are actions behind the things that they were doing. And it was just really beautiful and unexpected. And I feel like this Bernie story, one of the things that stuck with me about Jean Claire was when she said that when Bernie introduced this person that was clearly his partner or someone he was dating, had a romantic relationship with, she realized the shame that he must have experienced. It was like this eye-opening moment. It was so interesting to me to also think of it in that term of like, you're identifying this like shame that this person is experiencing, you're young, you're not just like registering that this is a relationship, but that there's something happening there socially for her.
Right.
Where she's like, oh,
wow,
this is a piece of you that you have to hide and you feel maybe bad about, because shame is a negative emotion.
Yes. I think I felt it's interesting because she talks about shame, but she talks about maybe that he was ashamed. She felt shame at not realizing that and not really being able to see that earlier and celebrate that with him. And I think that speaks to how she wanted to love him in his totality. She wanted to love him as a complete individual, right? Like just like when she was sitting on the floor trying to put together pieces of his life, she's like, this is not all of it. This is like this, we're missing things here. And I love this person, and I want to bring to his memorial a complete picture of what his life was. I don't want to hide any parts of it because there was no need for him. He shouldn't have had to hide any of that. He should have been able to love who he wanted to love and also be an amazing theologian and do the amazing things. I mean, she talks about all these people who came across this man and how wonderful he was and how great. I'm like, well, so we know that he's a great person, but also he was a gay man. And we should see all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of that should be part of honoring his life. So how do you honor a life? You honor a life in its completeness, not in pieces, And I think, to be honest with you, this is going off a little bit of a tangent, but I think sometimes when you think about what it means to go and speak at a memorial or to speak when someone has passed away, people want to talk about all the great things. Mm-hmm. They want to, it's almost like they're rewriting this person's life.
Totally.
Like, they get rid of everything that's wrong. I'm like, it's all them. And if you want to memorialize them, memorialize them as a whole person. Like we have to appreciate all of it. Not just the amazing freaking parts. It's like, that's not realistic.
Yeah. It's not realistic. And, only honoring this one part of Bernie's life would have also been sanitizing this piece of him. The inflection point on this story is that she goes on to name her daughter, who she was pregnant with when Bernie passed away. She names her daughter, I think, Bernadine, Bernie for short, which is so sweet. And I just thought like such a lovely ending. But I think that there is this element of sadness to this story. It's that Bernie never knows that people are honoring the fullness of who he was like that. You know, he had kept himself so siloed off, again, as like compartmentalized, you know, having to keep these parts of you so separate and independent. And I think it's really beautiful that she honored him, but it also made me a little sad because I was like,
I get that.
You know, it's a little after the fact with him.
Yeah, right.
Know?
It's like, why couldn't we do this while he was alive? But like, you know, it's a shame because you're right. It's like, we don't know. I mean, just from the beginning of the story, you hear her talk about this man with so much like love, you know? She's, you know, do you remember the part when she goes, you know, I go to my friend's house and be like, where's your Bernie? Like, why don't you have a Bernie? Come on, how sweet was that?
That was really
You're
sweet.
just like, it's just such a so beautiful like story of like someone that just loved her and was almost like an extension of her parents in some ways, you know, the way you hear her talk about it. But you're right. It's like, it's a shame because it didn't happen while he was around, you know, to see it and to really appreciate and to know that like he had a huge ally and somebody who was just going to have his back.
Totally.
And celebrate love the way he wanted to love.
Yeah. I mean, these stories are between Rosa and Jean Claire are so different in that like the circumstances, the people, everything about it is so different. You know, the fact that Bernie is this like almost uncle figure, whereas Rosa is talking about her husband and then her daughter. But at the same time, I think the big thread is that both of these people were so emotionally invested at the end in the LGBTQ people in their lives, and then are really like living their words with their support for like, you know, Jean Claire even says that she doesn't want, you know, for her, she really wants her life to reflect, I guess, the way that she felt about Bernie and, you know, doesn't want other people to experience that sense of like hiding part of themselves. And then Rosa, you know, you can hear just by how outspoken she is and how like passionate she is about her support for her daughter. And then also the acknowledging where she got it wrong as well.
Mm-hmm. Listening to these stories, I say, makes you feel a little more hope. It brings back a little more hope in allyship. We're talking about like people who actually had experiences that changed how they walk through the world and what kind of space they make for queer people or LGBTQIA people. And I think that it's so uplifting to hear these stories. I mean, even if there's a tinge of sadness with like Jean Claire's story, it's still an uplifting element to it of just being like, she was dead on like, I am going to honor this man. I'm going to find his partner. I'm going to bring him to this ceremony, and I'm going to make sure that everyone knows that this was his partner and that let him contribute stories so that we see and honor his life in its completeness. I just makes you like be like, you know, listen, there was a time, let's be honest, there was a time when allyship, I don't know if we all feel this way, but there was a time when allyship was extremely important, right? Yeah. It was like, we were like, we need the allies, we got to get you like, because we needed them to join the fight. Yeah. Right. And I'm not saying we don't, you know, we still do, but it's like, I think that we don't think about that so much anymore.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. Gosh, we've gotten to this point where, and I think it, you know, it depends like where you are and what we're talking about within the LGBTQ plus community, where it's like almost like passe to identify yourself as an ally. Isn't that kind of funny?
It is.
Where you're like, oh,
you're like,
an ally. You know, I think of I think of people I've encountered who are like, I am an ally, and I'm just like, okay,
you feel like that's so 90s,
you know,
like,
but yes, exactly. But it's actually like I'm just being so jaded. It's so it is so important and so wonderful.
It is.
And I also am thinking about how in other places around the country, what that actually means. Like I think right now when I think about being a bisexual person or a queer identified person or gay or lesbian, I think that, you know, when you think of somebody saying that they're a gay ally, it feels very old fashioned to say something like that. But,
yeah, I get it.
Yeah. But when I think of a lot of the anti-trans rhetoric that's happening and anti-trans bills that are happening across the country, and I think of a place that is trying to pass or has passed these, you know, vitriolically anti-trans bills that impact children. And I think about the parents who have not felt called to this fight, who are now showing up to these hearings and giving testimonies about their kids, and who are the only voice there in wherever they're living. Like that, to me, I feel like also brings new meaning to the idea of being an ally, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, I think like you're right. The term has gotten diluted. It doesn't hold the power it used to, but there are small acts of allyship that are very impactful. You know, like take for instance, like if I go someplace and I'm out with friends, and this is the thing that happens, which I literally feel like I just want to jump out of my skin sometimes when this happens, where people come over to the table and it's me and some of my friends, and most of them are female identified, and they're like, ladies, and I'm literally shocked out of my system, and like, are you serious right now? And somebody at the table is like, I think you could use a different term, right?
Yeah.
Or they leave, or this person leaves and like, he really needs to like work on his gender neutral language.
Yeah.
Like, that is an act of allyship.
Yeah.
Right. And that means something to me, because it's like, I feel seen in that. So it's like, you're right. We have crappy allyship, allyship light. And then you have like the real stuff that is like these quiet acts of I stand with you. Yeah. Right. And those are important. They're important. They're really important.
I was watching this panel once that I think it was Amara Jones, who is a journalist who runs Trans/Media, was saying that when you think of this is like my very bad regurgitation of the phrase, so I don't want to get it wrong, but I believe what was said was that like when you think of the allied forces in NATO, they weren't just like, we're allies, and they were done. And that was it. It was like they actually then went and fought with the other people. They showed up and they fought with them. And I think that's why sometimes now we hear like the term accomplice, because like actually when you think about the kind of allyship, it like requires risk. So like,
yes, it does.
Thinking of Jean Claire was like, I'm going to call Bernie's former partner or whatever and invite them. Like Jean Claire could have faced isolation and alienation from family. Same with Rosa, also coming from a deeply religious background. She could have been pushed out of her religious community, etc. I feel like a lot of times the thing that's getting lost these days is that it feels like sincere allyship requires also risk, because you are also like sticking your neck out in a way that is making people uncomfortable or inconvenient, or like you are the one parent at the school board saying that you believe trans kids should get to use the bathrooms that align with their sense of self. Like I feel like there is the element of risk that people of that identity would also experience if they spoke up for themselves.
I mean, you just said a word.
Okay.
Like that was really good. I love that. Yeah, the risk element. Wow. And I think that's why we're so turned off by that phrase now, because now it seems as though the allyship, there is no risk attached to it at all. It is just, it's almost like in name and nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just very different.
Well, credit to Amara Jones for kind of helping me think about that.
I love that.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Amara Jones.
Yeah.
Wonderful. The allyship in these two stories came from people who aren't LGBTQIA themselves, obviously, as allies they're not, but they became allies because of the people they love. It's like these are human beings that these people loved, and because of that, they needed to love them for all of the parts of who they were, including being lesbian, gay, whatever that is.
I think my big takeaway is similarly the journey, the piece that nobody is born fully understanding all of these things, and that I think a lot of times if you are somebody who like spends way too much time on social media like I do, a lot of times we like to pretend that people are born this way and understand, are at the graduate level of any conversation. And what I appreciate about this is that we got to see the journey, and that like change is possible, evolution is possible. And what is even the point of caring about these issues if you don't believe that people can change?
The I'm From Driftwood podcast is hosted by Phil, aka Corinne,
and Alex Berg, and is produced by Andy Egan Thorpe. It's recorded as a program of I'm From Driftwood, the LGBTQAI+ story archive.
Its mission is to send a life-saving message to queer and trans people everywhere. You are not alone.
I'm From Driftwood's founder and executive director is Nathan Mansky. Its program director is Damian Middlefeld.
Our score is provided by Elevate Audio.
The stories you heard today are available in their entirety, plus thousands more, at I'mFromDriftwood.org.
You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
Or subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs
in partnership with the City Council.
Additional funding is provided by the Humanities New York Sharp Grant with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Federal American Rescue Plan Act.
Thanks for listening, y'all.